Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome in across the continent and beyond today for another very exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. If you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world, and everything we do goes through our YouTube channel. So if you want to check out this program or like 4,000 others in 3 weeks or 3 years, you can head there and do just that. There is so much to explore and discover. But I'm particularly excited because today marks the official beginning of a series we have done 5 years in a row with a new name, the Parks Adventure Series. We are partnering with the amazing folks at Parks Canada to showcase stories coast to coast to coast of some of the most incredible places, not just in Canada, but the entire world. We've got some really incredible tales for you. Please do sign up for the rest. It's going to be a wild adventure to help wrap up the school year. But today, as we begin, we are joined by Joe Daniels, one of the best educators in all of Parks Canada, to talk about their amazing parks in BC and specifically blue ice to blue carbon. Now, some of you may know, some of you may have joined us for some glacier programs throughout the year, but we have done a big focus on glaciers because this is the International Year for Glacier Preservation as laid out by UNESCO. So there's more educational resources than ever, more great stuff going on for glaciers, and I'm so happy of all the options for you. You've chosen to join us. Now, without further ado, I'm going to zip it. We've got a lot to cover today. So, Joe, welcome to the broadcast, man, and nice to see you again. Take us away.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. My name's Joe. I'm with Parks Canada, and I'm joining you live from our laboratory here in our Vancouver office, teach you a little bit about blue ice to blue carbon. Now, as Jesse was mentioning, 2025 is the UNESCO International Year for Glacier Preservation. But what is a glacier, and why are they important? A glacier is a large, persistent mass of ice and snow that forms on land specifically. How are they formed on land? Well, glaciers form in places where snow accumulates faster than it can melt. It's more and more layers of snow as they build up. They get compressed. The layers underneath become denser. They turn into sheets of ice, kind of compacted by the force of gravity and all the weight of the snow above it. The snow becomes thicker. It becomes denser. So the snowflakes become grains. And the ice that's formed in glaciers is very, very thick, very, very dense. So the ice that you would pull out of your fridge. So say if you pull an ice cube out of your fridge, that ice cube is about 90% air. Snow is about 90% air, whereas glacial ice is about 20% air. So if you were to take that ice cube from your fridge and throw it on the ground, please don't do that, sorry parents. But if you throw that ice cube on the ground, it'll probably shatter. Whereas if you took a piece of glacier ice and you threw it on your kitchen floor, you'd probably chip your kitchen tiles because it's very, very thick. It's more like a rock, really, than ice. Because glaciers are so heavy, they move under the force of their own weight. So some folks ask, how do glaciers move? Well, it's the force of gravity. All that snow and ice has a tremendous amount of weight, and gravity causes the glacier to advance downhill. As temperatures rise, glaciers retreat, so they kind of back up as they start melting. Why are glaciers important? Well, we can think of glaciers as giant icy reservoirs, things that store water. Almost 70% of the Earth's fresh water supply is stored as snow or ice. Canada is the most glacier-rich country in the world. It actually accounts for 20% of the world's total glacier cover. And runoff from glaciers, snow, and ice are essential sources of clean water for all living things, including humans. This picture shows Mount Robson. Robson Glacier is the headwaters of the Fraser River. Now, Mount Robson, it's traditional First Nations name, the Texaco people, a Secwepemc people who've lived by the mountain forever, is the striped rock. Yahayazkun is how it's pronounced. And as I was saying, these are the headwaters of the Fraser River. So the Robson Glacier here in Robson Provincial Park is what feeds the Fraser River. The Fraser River's traditional name is the Stalo. That's its name in the Hulkamalem language of the downriver First Nations who've lived on the river forever, really. It's designated a Canadian Heritage River, and it flows from those headwaters I was mentioning at Mount Robson all the way to Metro Vancouver, where it meets the ocean. It's a distance of about 1,375 kilometers. The Fraser River watershed is covers about 25% of British Columbia. It's the largest drainage system in BC and the 5th largest in all of Canada. And it's home to 60% of BC's population. The Fraser River is also one of the most important salmon spawning rivers on Earth, especially for sockeye salmon. These are the red salmon that you see here spawning in the Fraser River. They usually come in the fall to spawn. The Fraser River actually supports 5 Pacific salmon species, but the most significant run that it supports is for sockeye salmon. Cold glacier water helps to support these salmon spawns, the salmon runs. Colder water holds more oxygen, which salmon eggs depend on to survive and grow. Ideal conditions for salmon eggs is flowing water that's roughly 10 degrees Celsius. And salmon are really the thread that tie all life together here in BC. Everything really relies on them for food. They feed bears, they feed wolves, they feed eagles and critically endangered southern resident killer whales. Their bodies even fertilize the forest soil when they come in and die every year after spawning. Those bodies get carried back into the forest by wildlife. They rot into the forest floor and fertilize the trees there. It's part of why our forests are so rich, so fertile here in BC. But salmon, of course, haven't just been feeding wildlife. They've been feeding people along the Fraser River since time immemorial. Indigenous people have been harvesting salmon up and down the Fraser. It's a really important part of First Nations culture here in BC. The image you see here shows a stallow fisherman dip netting for salmon from a little wooden platform above the swirling eddies in the Fraser Canyon. It's some pretty treacherous waters, and this is how the salmon have been traditionally fished there. The indigenous economy of the Pacific Northwest was based more on fish than furs. And so when the Hudson's Bay Company came here, they really had to adapt their operations for trading in salmon, which is what they did at posts like Fort Langley. This is an image of Fort Langley, and also upriver posts like Fort St. James, closer to the headwaters of the Fraser. This is really the beginning of what we would know as the salmon fishery, the modern salmon fishery here in BC. As technology evolved, so did that fishery. Canning technology first appeared toward the end of the 19th century, leading to a cannery boom up and down the BC coast. Canneries like the Gulf of Georgia Cannery in Steveston, this is an image of that cannery, it used to be called the Monster Cannery because it was so big, employed a very diverse workforce, including Indigenous, Euro-Canadian, Chinese, and Japanese folks. This is a Chinese gentleman loading cans into one of the machines at the cannery. And salmon fishing remains a really important part of Indigenous culture and BC's economy to this day. It's a really important part of life here in British Columbia. You know, salmon aren't the only Fraser River treasure that we can thank glaciers for. There's also gold. Yes, gold is found in the Fraser River too. And glaciers are really what put it there. As glaciers advance, they act like giant icy bulldozers. They reshape the landscape. They move massive amounts of rock. This is an image that shows what's called a glacial erratic. It's a giant boulder that's been picked up and deposited by a glacier. This one's called Big Rock, not just a clever name. That's near Okotoks, Alberta. And it originated in the mountains of Jasper National Park. So it weighs about 16,500 tons, and it was carried about 400 kilometers by the action of glaciers. It's pretty incredible. This is a glacier erratic a lot closer to where I live. I live in Abbotsford, BC, and this is a glacier erratic that's found in Aldergrove Regional Park. It's called the Aldergrove Erratic. According to Stallow elder Sonny McCalsey, who's an incredible storyteller, cultural advisor, and historian, the Hulkamalum name for this rock is Mexel, which means nose. There's a bit of a story there. But that's the traditional name for this rock. It's Mexel, and it's another great example of one of these awesome glacier erratics, these big boulders picked up and moved by glaciers, a testament to their power. The Fraser River itself was created by glaciers. About 16,000 years ago, the Cordilleran ice sheet, a massive glacier, covered the whole province, what would become British Columbia. Slowly, as temperatures rose, that glacier receded. So by about 11,500 years ago, it had receded enough and meltwater from that glacier had filled an enormous prehistoric lake that we call Glacial Lake Fraser. So it covered about 75,000 square kilometers of the northern interior of British Columbia. And it was held back at its southern end by an icy dam. This is near a location called Big Bar today. Eventually, that dam eroded and collapsed, and it released a massive deluge of water that flowed through channels carved by those glaciers to the Pacific Ocean and created the Fraser River that we know today. These powerful flows of water and ice carved canyons through the coast mountains. This is a picture of the Fraser Canyon. It scoured out the landscape, breaking up and moving massive amounts of rock and releasing minerals that were locked inside and depositing them further downstream. Gold carved out of these rocks by the glaciers and further eroded into flakes and dust by the rushing waters of the Fraser River is heavy. And because it's heavier than the other sediment around it, it settles into the sands and gravel on the river bottom, and it's further sifted by that flowing water and gravity to form what are called placer deposits in the sand and gravel bars along the river. And this is where prospectors went looking for gold. When word got out that there was gold found in the Fraser River in the year 1858, it led to a gold rush. Thousands of people from all around the world flooded into the area looking to strike it rich. I've got a historic image here to show you. This is a miner who actually comes from China. He's a miner of Chinese descent, and he's using a device called a rocker. It's called that because it's similar to like a rocker, a bassinet that you put a baby in, or it works a similar way. It helps you rock the sediments to sift gold dust out of it. It's a really ingenious tool for looking for gold. This gold rush that happened on the Fraser River was one of the main things that led to the proclamation of the colony of British Columbia by Queen Victoria in November of that year. So that was the act that made BC a colony of England. And it was really a precursor to what would eventually have us becoming a province of Canada in 1871. It laid the foundation for the multicultural BC we know today as well. So, you might say glaciers didn't just make the Fraser, they played a really big role in making BC too. But, sadly, BC's glaciers aren't what they used to be. Rising global temperatures due to climate change have been causing our glaciers to retreat at an alarming rate. This is an image of Mount Robson, taken in 1911 by Arthur Wheeler, a mountain explorer here in BC around the turn of the 20th century. Now, this photo was taken in 2011 in the exact same place by the Mountain Legacy Project. They're an organization that's been tracking changes in glaciers using historic photography. And you can clearly see in this picture how much the Robson Glacier has receded. Research is indicating that glaciers in Canada's Rocky Mountains are receding at a rate of about 5 meters per year. Glaciers in Canada's Western Mountains melt. They're projected to lose 70% to 95% of their 2005 ice volume by 2100. And that would drastically alter water flow and impact ecosystems downriver here in BC and in Alberta as well. The loss of glaciers will affect not only water systems, but also biodiversity, cultural traditions, and the livelihoods of thousands of people, highlighting our ongoing and profound connection to these amazing frozen landscapes. The impacts of climate change aren't just felt on the glaciers, they're felt downstream as well. With less cold water flowing into the Fraser River from glaciers and the summers getting hotter and drier, the streams that salmon depend on for spawning have been getting warmer, and it making it harder for their eggs to survive and mature. Increases in heavy rainfall and extreme weather events are causing increases in erosion along the river as well. That causes landslides that can block salmon from reaching their spawning streams altogether. But climate change isn't just affecting salmon, it's touching the lives of the people that live along the Fraser River too. 2021 was a year that really illustrated these impacts. A really hot, dry summer that year led to increases in wildfires, like the one that destroyed the town of Lytton in the Fraser Canyon in June of 2021. And in fall of that same year, there were 3 consecutive atmospheric river events. So these are really heavy rainfall events that dumped more than a month's worth of rain over a period of about just 2 days. More than 300 millimeters in some places along the Fraser River. And this caused landslides and widespread flooding. This is actually a photo taken not that far from where I live in Abbotsford, BC. So these impacts of climate change are impacting people quite seriously as well. And these are just some of the reasons why Parks Canada is working to understand and mitigate the impacts of climate change. In Jasper National Park, near the glacial headwaters of the Fraser River, Parks Canada and Natural Resource Canada and the Geological Survey of Canada are cooperating to measure the rate of glacier ice loss each year by monitoring a series of instruments that are drilled into the Athabasca Glacier from high in the ice fields to the tip of the glacier toe at the base. The research team crosses the glacier multiple times every year, and they're measuring snow accumulation, ice melt, and they're downloading data from ice weather stations that are positioned there on the glacier. In addition to monitoring the retreat of glaciers, scientists from University of Northern British Columbia, Hakai Institute, and Natural Resources Canada have been working to map the glaciers in Jasper National Park for several decades. And more recently, Parks Canada has been working with the Royal Alberta Museum and the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute to study ancient organic material that's been uncovered by these retreating glaciers. This is helping us to understand what the ecosystem in Jasper was like thousands of years ago. It's really fascinating. So glaciers, in some ways, can be like time capsules as well. Meanwhile, 1,375 kilometers downstream where the Fraser River meets the Salish Sea, Parks Canada researchers are studying how coastal wetlands can help us adapt to climate change. The Fraser River carries an estimated 20 million tons of sediment to the ocean every year, so much that the Fraser River's sediment plume can be seen from space. This is a photo taken from orbit showing all that sediment going into the ocean every year. That's what that kind of gray cloud is coming out of the river. That's dirt coming out of the Fraser River, sand, gravel, sediment. All of the sediment carried to the ocean each year creates and maintains the Fraser River Delta. It's a vast network of tidal wetlands that covers more than 1,000 square kilometers, and it's constantly growing as more and more sediment is added. In addition to being a really important stopover for millions of migratory birds and a rearing habitat for juvenile salmon, the salt marshes and eelgrass meadows of the Fraser Delta create deep blue carbon sinks. Now, what does this mean? Well, across the Salish Sea from the Fraser River on the west side of Vancouver Island in Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, Parks Canada researchers and students led by Dr. Marlo Palat have been studying the capacity of coastal wetlands and eelgrass meadow ecosystems to capture and store carbon in their roots and soil. So when we talk about blue carbon, we're talking about carbon stored in aquatic ecosystems. The research Dr. Palat's team have been doing has found that salt marshes in particular in the National Park Reserve are able to store more carbon than BC's boreal forests. Some estimates indicate 3 to 5 times more. It's estimated actually that a single hectare of salt marsh can capture the same amount of carbon released by 488 cars each year. Salt marshes don't just pull carbon out of the air, they lock it deep underground for a long time. All that sediment that's constantly building up on the delta buries the carbon deep in those sediments. That makes it really hard for it to get released back in the atmosphere. So these are some of the things that Parks Canada is doing to understand the impacts of climate change and find ways to mitigate those impacts. But what are some things that you can do? Well, first and foremost, support the establishment and conservation of wetlands in your community. Whether you live on a coast or further inland, wetlands still play a really important role in cleaning carbon out of our atmosphere. You can take steps to reduce your own carbon footprint and the amount of emissions you create every year. That helps as well. If you're traveling to the Rockies this summer, keep an eye out for these icy stations. It's kind of a play on word on selfie. And the idea is that folks in these certain locations can take selfies that will help to capture images of glaciers. Or if maybe you're on the East Coast in the Maritimes, you might see the coastie stations as well. They do the same thing. So the idea is if people are taking photos at these locations, we can look at those photos and track changes over time, both in the level of glaciers, the retreat of glaciers, but also in the level of sea, the sea level and where it's going. So we could track sea level rise using the same sort of method. So these are just some of the things that you can do to help support this work that we're doing here in BC and Alberta on blue carbon and the blue ice of glaciers. That's my presentation. I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And
fantastic.
Jesse.
Thank you so much, Joe. What a deep dive into all sorts of cool stuff in BC and beyond. And again, we're going to pass along all those resources more to all our classes at the end. And I really encourage you, follow up with more learning. 45 minutes isn't near enough to learn all there is to know about glaciers in our epic national park. So lots to explore and discover. Miss Aboyan's class, Fern Avenue, we're going to come to you live in just a second. So if you want to put on your thinking caps, come up with some questions, we've come to you momentarily. But some of our great YouTube questions have already begun. Caesar in Nicaragua wants to know, what's the biggest rock that's been moved by a glacier? You highlighted that fantastic erratic. Is that the biggest one? Are there more out there? What's the deal?
Well, I don't know what the biggest glacier erratic is. I don't have the answer. I'm sorry about that. That big rock that I mentioned is one of the biggest ones that I'm aware of here in Canada. Like I was saying, it's 16,500 tons, carried 400 kilometers by glaciers from Jasper to Okotoks. So a pretty amazing example of that.
It's pretty wild. I grew up in Ontario, and I think a lot of Canadians don't know that, all of Canada was under glaciers for thousands of years. So the whole landscape, the fact that we have so many lakes up here, the fact that there are big rocks and big pushed, moraines everywhere, like all of that is because we were under a big pile of ice for a very long time, which is amazing.
Jesse, just like you, I grew up in Ontario as well. And right near where I grew up was the Niagara Escarpment. Yep. So if you're familiar with the Niagara Escarpment, that's actually the edge of a glacial lake. So I'm talking about Glacial Lake Fraser here, this massive lake. There was a similar lake like that right there in Ontario, and the Niagara Escarpment kind of shows the boundary of that. So you can really see the impact of glaciers on the landscape all across Canada, not just here in BC.
Super cool. Well, we're going to head to our live classes for a second. Miss Aboyan's class, if you want to come on in California, flick on your mic and you're good to go. Fern Avenue, we're coming to you right after, but take us away, guys. Hey, that's great.
Just from there. Really loud. Okay, let's see. Tanner?
I'm excited to hear your question.
What would happen if you took a piece of glacial ice and you hammered it tons of times?
Ooh, if you're breaking apart glacier ice, Joe, what happens to it?
Okay, so if you were to break glacier ice, first and foremost, you need something for breaking rocks. So and often you probably use the same tools, but you can't really chip glacier ice the same way as you would chip normal ice that forms, say, on your car. Like I was saying, glacier ice is very, very dense. So if you were going to be breaking apart glacier ice, you probably need a sledgehammer, maybe even a jackhammer to do that. Though at the same time, we don't really want people doing that on our glaciers. We want those glaciers to stay put. So Please don't smash our glaciers in our parks. But if you were going to do it, you'd need some pretty heavy machinery to do so.
I will say, once the glaciers break off at their trailing edge and they become icebergs, they float down to where I am in Newfoundland, and people regularly cut off pieces of them and put them in their drinks. So you can put glacier ice ultimately in a drink if you want to have one, but only in special circumstances and not actually on the glacier. So great
only for adult supervision, please. Yeah.
Fern Avenue, you got some great questions in the chat, but if you want to come live, I'll turn on the mic and you can do that. Let's see if we got the audio, and then we'll see if not, I'll share them from the chat. Hey, folks, let's see. Are you good?
Yeah.
Hey, guys, welcome in, Fern Avenue.
Hey.
So which question? You've got three. Which one do you want to lead us with?
Okay, Olivia.
How do glaciers move the rocks?
Yes, how do we even pick up the rocks, Joe? What's the deal?
Great question. So, like I said, glaciers, as they advance, they're these huge chunks of ice that are extremely dense, and they're really heavy, and they're moving under their own weight. So as they're moving along the landscape, they push stuff. They pick up rocks that are in the ground or kind of along the surface, and they get pushed along by the glacier. So that's how they're picking up rocks. They're literally just kind of working like a big bulldozer, moving along and pushing those rocks that are on the landscape.
Yeah.
So that's how they pick up and move rocks. Yeah.
Like even mountains to a glacier is like an unstoppable force. I mean, climate change is affecting them in a very big way, but if you sent like a nuclear missile at a glacier, it would do very little. I mean, glaciers are gigantic. Some of them are several kilometers thick. So a mountain to that is just an impediment that it can scrape and grind and rip off. And it's quite the force in nature.
That's exactly right. Like calling it an unstoppable force is pretty accurate. Yeah. It's just this incredible wall of ice that's just moving along the landscape. and pushing rocks just like a big icy bulldozer.
For some of our kids, I mean, I grew up in Toronto, so the CN Tower is my sort of go-to for a tall building, but the glaciers in Ontario were taller than the CN Tower considerably back in the day. And so you just have to imagine a wall of ice that's that big, endlessly into the horizon, coming and pushing the landscape. All you can do is get out of its way on a long-term scale. So I love this question. Thanks, guys. All right, some great questions from our YouTube chat, and then we're going to head back to our live classes. Let's see. Miss Shields' class at Peel Virtual Elementary School has a really neat one. We've never had this before. If glaciers melt too much, can they also release ancient pathogens? Like, is there any diseases that we might get because of melting glaciers?
You know, that's possible. Like I was saying, glaciers act a bit like an icy time capsule as well. And we've been doing some of that research in Jasper where as the glaciers are receding, they're melting, we're able to pick up pollen or little bits of organic matter that have been hidden or buried under that ice. And that kind of helps paint a picture of what Jasper looked like thousands of years ago. It's entirely possible there could be organisms that are trapped in that ice, pathogens that could be released. I'm not an expert in that field, though, so I can't really give you a super firm answer, but I'd say it's possible. It's totally possible.
It's not something that we're sort of staying up nights worrying about because it's unlikely, but it is possible because a lot of things we're discovering from the ice as the ice retreats. We can find like full mammoths, like a body of something that's been dead for thousands of years, and like there's meat on its bones. Like it's like an elephant that's died and been entombed in ice for thousands of years, which is super, super cool and weird and neat and all sorts of good stuff. So I love that question. All right, Joe, Miss Coburn's class, they're at Dalewood, another virtual school coming out of Hamilton. They want to know, what's the biggest environmental effect that you've seen personally? So I know, I always tell our classes, you don't just need an expert to talk about climate change. Ask your teachers, ask your parents, and it's radically different than it was even 20, 30 years ago. Is there anything on a personal note you want to share with us?
Sure. I've noticed summers just being a lot hotter and drier. A few summers ago here in BC, we experienced what was called a heat dome. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was a heat wave that impacted my community in Abbotsford, and we regularly had temperatures during the day that soared up to 40 degrees, maybe higher. It was pretty rough. So that one I remember very intimately, but also on a smaller scale, growing up in Ontario, I remember very, very snowy winters and not seeing quite as deep snow now in these winters here. Again, I'm in coastal BC, very different environment, but even when I go back to Ontario, I notice a pretty different level of snowfall. So like those small changes are there. And it's amazing. Like historically, a great example, I was talking a bit about Fort Langley. During the Victorian era, when Fort Langley was built, there was actually a mini ice age that sort of happened. So during the Victorian era, it was colder, and there's these amazing like drawings you can see of people skating on the River Thames in London. That's not something people can do anymore. The ice actually formed on the river thick enough that people could walk out on there, but now that doesn't happen. So that's kind of a good illustration how like climate change is both a natural process and a human-caused process, and you can see those changes even in the historical record of a couple hundred years.
What a great nuanced answer. Thanks, man. And certainly, again, ask your parents, ask your teachers. I encourage you to do that when you're done this broadcast. You'd be amazed what they'll share on how things were a little bit different when they were kids, too. Mr. Boyne's class, let's head back to California. If you've got a second question for us, come on in, unmute your mic, and you're good to go. Fern Avenue, we're coming to you right next. Hey, guys.
Hey, Chloe.
There you are. Perfect.
Did the glaciers move every year?
How much do they move every year, Joe?
Great question. So based on the research that's been going on in the Rocky Mountains, we're finding they're retreating right now at a rate of about 5 meters per year. So 5 meters per year doesn't seem very fast, but it's a pretty alarming rate when it comes to glaciers. You'll often hear people say the term, it's moving at a glacial pace. What that generally means is very, very slow. So glaciers tend to advance and retreat very, very slowly at a rate of about a few meters a year. But sadly, right now, we're mainly seeing them retreating due to global warming.
You shared an example of some pictures of this, and every glacier program we do, if you look back at photos from like the late 1800s, early 1900s, the radical difference in where glaciers are now is wild. Like, I think that's one of the great things that you can do to illustrate the cause and sort of scope of a problem is to show just how much that's happened all over the world, everywhere we look at glaciers. It's a little jarring, kind of distressing actually, but again, way beyond what we had for many thousands of years before this, and it sort of underscores our impact on the climate. So I love when we get this question. Thanks, guys. All right, Fern Avenue, I'm coming to you, and then we'll take some from our YouTube friends. Time flies and you're having fun. We are nearing the end of the broadcast. We'll take a few more before we wrap up. So Fern Avenue, come on in. Hey.
Can you explain the kinds of things that cause glaciers to melt?
Ooh, yeah.
Absolutely. So I mentioned a bit how climate change is a natural and human impacted process. So climate change really is a balance between sources of carbon, sources of atmospheric carbon, or sources of greenhouse gases, and what we call sinks. So these are things that capture that carbon from the atmosphere. Great examples of natural sources of greenhouse gases are things like volcanic activity, like geologic activity, but also like methane from animals. So literally like farts from animals. That's an example of greenhouse gases that are naturally caused. Natural sinks are things like forest plants. They use photosynthesis to clean carbon out of the atmosphere. So they breathe in carbon and breathe out oxygen. We do the opposite. We breathe in oxygen, breathe out carbon. So when there's balances, shifts in the balance of those natural sources and sinks, you see increases in global temperature. The greenhouse effect causes the temperature to rise, and that's a real impact on glaciers. Those are the things that really cause glaciers to melt. Humans are adding to this process because we're adding more sources of carbon, things like combustion engines, fumes from industry. These are all things that contribute to that climate change effect. So those are some of the natural processes that impact climate. And really those changes in climate are really the things that cause glaciers to melt or to build up. So they cause them to advance or retreat.
Yeah, we've had a lot of. Sorry, my camera doesn't want to jigger right now. There we go. Now it's
No,
good.
there we are.
Polar programs. We've talked about this in the Arctic and Antarctic a lot. And one of the big things is that the winter's still cold, or the winter's still too warm for it to really build up. And then the summer comes along and melts more than it should. And so we get this every single year. So literally, it's just too hot. It's hotter than it's ever been. It's hotter than it's been for a very, very long time. And that's having a really big negative impact on glaciers and other habitats around this planet. So I love when we get this question, and it's really important. It underscores a lot of what we do here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So thanks, Joe. All right. I love this question. I've actually found a great video on this too, but Carlene 7A wants to know, if lots of glaciers melt at once, can it cause a flood?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have lots of glaciers melting, the runoff can really accumulate. A great example is kind of mentioning that lake that filled up in the interior of the province. There was an icy dam at the south end, and because the water didn't really have anywhere to flow to the ocean, it was stopped by that dam. It filled up the northern interior of BC. So as glaciers melt, if a lot of glaciers melt and they produce a lot of runoff, yeah, they absolutely can cause a flood.
I put it in the chat. So SciShow is one of the best organizations on YouTube generally. They've got an amazing short video on the biggest glacial outburst flood ever and how it shaped a lot of the North American landscape. So if you're in Canada or the US, a lot of the landscapes around you were caused by huge floods when glacier walls collapsed and just inundated huge areas. Like there's literally ripples in the rock from how big these waves and the power of big waves coming from a big glacier lake would be. So it's one of the most amazing things that's ever happened in the history of nature. And I love this query. Joe, I'm going to highlight for all our classes. Again, I really encourage you, check out the UN Glaciers page. There's a lot there. Parks Adventure for more in this series together. But before we wrap up and bring in our classes to say thank you and farewell, is there any final message you want to leave us with about glaciers before we say goodbye?
I just want to respond to one question I see in the chat about, are there any rivers in Ontario or parts of Canada like the Fraser River? The Fraser River is really unique. There are rivers that are similar to the Fraser, but the Fraser River is a very, very special river. It's one of the longest undammed rivers in the world. It's one of the wildest rivers in the world. And it's a river I'm very lucky to live next to. And I'm really proud to work with Parks Canada and all the work that we do to help understand and mitigate climate change. I think it's all really great stuff. And I'm really happy to be part of an organization that does that kind of work.
Pretty cool message to leave us on, Joe. Such a pleasure having you back, man. Really, really appreciate your passion and expertise. And as you know from past broadcasts, what we do to wrap up every show, I'm going to bring in our Mrs. Havoyans class, our Fern Avenue students. Thank you so much for being here. If you're on YouTube, you can scream and yell as well. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Hope to see you back for more Parks Adventure soon. And see you for now. Bye.